30 years ago, historical events changed Europe a lot. Communist bloc fell, and then the Soviet Union also fell apart. It gave back democracy and freedom to many nations in Europe, and also raised a new possibility to have bigger united Europe on the basics of democracy and freedom values. And it is my honor to have a conversation about those issues with Petri Sarvamaa, member of the European Parliament, elected from Finland, member of the EPP parliamentary group. Hello, Mr. Sarvamaa.
Hello, it's my privilege to be here.
My first question would be a bit more abstract. Maybe you can give your kind of historical feeling of those events from 1989 to 1991. How do you assess those events in Europe at that time?
Well, let me maybe first start with a little bit of personal flavor to all this, because you know I remember those days vividly, and it's mostly because I was myself in journalism and international affairs. And in '89, when the Berlin Wall came down, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, with CNN, and I was working for CNN back then. And and I was in the studio discussions about, you know, then there was Gorbachev paid a visit to Finland, and I was trying to analyze all those things. And then next year we had the Bush-Gorbachev summit in Helsinki, and I was covering that as a journalist and analyzing that. So I had a pretty close look at things. I was a young man, but I had a pretty close look at things back then, and I can remember so vividly how it was like you could almost touch it in the air. You know, the excitement that people had all over the Western hemisphere, also in the United States. But I mean here at home and in Europe, it was just incredible. I mean, that you had the feeling that everything is going to change. The world will really change a lot, and yeah, I mean, it was so exciting. What happened then of course, '91 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it was crazy years, and everything that happened in between in Russia and the tanks rolling the streets, and then of course Tallinn and Riga and Vilnius. Yeah, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about those days.
Do you remember well what was the perception of the process of collapse of the Soviet Union in the Finnish public mainstream?
Well, now this is of course something that you would have to be a Finn, and not just a Finn, but I mean someone who grew up at least. You know, I was almost too young, but I was very interested in international affairs already when I was like 5 years old. So I think I can explain a little bit how it was. But you would have to understand that, you know, Finland had built its whole existence in international relations and its independence after the Second World War on this extremely close relation with Russia, with the Soviet Union. So that's like the main block that you would always have there in trying to then think about how the Finns and the official Finland and the people, the man on the street, felt about those dramatic events. So I would say a couple of things. Maybe, you know, one was maybe people were a bit worried. So this is already something that is very different from your perspective. I mean, I'm sure you were worried too. I mean, like physically and whether it's going to be war or safe or whatever. But for Finns, it was also this worry about how the status quo will change. Because you know, people who grew up after the war, they grew up in this almost like you know, everything was in big sleep. It was a total status quo. Everything that was uh, everything bad that was happening in the world was happening sort of like far away, or at least it was happening beyond the magic, very stable circuit of the Warsaw Pact and NATO, and Finland sitting in between as a neutral country. So so that was the perspective that people had looking into those events. So I would say that the thing that comes to my mind first for Finns was being worried about what's going to happen next.
But as long as I understand from many memoirs and many interviews, Finns felt indeed specially for Estonians at that time.
Oh, absolutely. No. Let there be no misunderstanding about that. Estonians, you were our brothers in many ways, and we felt especially dearly about your fate, and we were looking out from Finland out to Europe, and to Soviet Union, and then the Baltics, and then down to the former Soviet bloc. You had a very special place in our hearts. I mean, you were like the others were much more distant. Estonians were always our brothers and sisters.
When the wall collapsed and then the Soviet Union collapsed and the new democracies emerged, there was a situation when I think that most of the old countries of Europe and Finland also felt that this is something special. This is an era where there will be more security, more cooperation, more trade, and less fear, and more safety generally for the public. But then special issues came to the agenda. I mean, now you must think as an old Europe to have those new democracies with many problems and with less experience of the free society in the European Union. You must have them in different European structures and share them with them the common room. How do you feel the process of practical reunification of the Baltic states with the Europe, I mean the European Union and the membership in the European Union, did it went really well? And we can say now that the former Soviet states, which are at the moment in the in the European Union, now are absolutely full members in all meanings.
Oh, absolutely, and listening to your introduction to this theme, I already found myself going back and thinking about how actually, probably looking from Tallinn to Helsinki, we were the window to the west. But looking from Helsinki outwards, we were not that much really. I mean, if we think about the union, the process for Finland, we joined in 1995. That was 6 years after the Berlin Wall came down, 5.5 years, and that was several years after Estonia regained her independence. So we were in a process ourselves as well. And therefore, I think we were also busy relocating ourselves a bit. Of course, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, of course, Finns always thought that we are very distinctively part of the West and not the Soviet Union, and that's what we paid a very dear price fighting for. So that's something that is always in our heart. But in political terms, we didn't have any sort of like big brother looking down at Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania starting their own process to regain their full European status, and then going on the 90s. Something that was always very, very important to me, and that I spoke a lot about. I worked already when I was a journalist. Is the security arrangement, and the joining the North Atlantic Alliance, and there you were showing us the way, and so these things are not simple, um, and 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 I remember in many ways, when Estonia was just had just reborn, and as an independent nation, I was coming back from some covering something, I don't remember where, and I was sitting in a plane next to an Estonian young diplomat who was like maybe, I don't know, 25 or 26 years old, and I was like, I was in awe about how this, talking to him and listening to him. I realized that these guys actually have a very, very fresh look at all that is happening around them. Although you had been sort of like prisoners of you were locked down under a communist regime, but at the same time, the young people that came out and went to conquer Europe and Brussels were very, very fresh in their thinking, and ready to do big things. And I think that when you joined NATO, then later, and then you started the digital revolution. Now we're going, year after year, decades, but still, it's part of the same picture to me. How I feel about Estonia taking her place again in Europe.
One of the main, I think, words at the period of the collapse of the Eastern Bloc was word solidarity. Solidarity between nations, solidarity around common values. Now this word is again one of the main discussive words in the European Union politics and the exchange of the opinions, in many cases because of the migration, sometimes because of the economical issue, but also, for example, because of Russia. Taking in account those problematic points, how do you rate the level of the European internal solidarity?
Well, here we may come back to this later, but already here I would like to, look at this in a little wider terms, because there is a difference between the so-called new, not new anymore, but I mean member states that joined after the Iron Curtain came down, and between the old members. Now Finland is somewhere in between. But solidarity, I'm saying this because when it's something like COVID, when COVID hit, and there was a shortage of things around Europe, and then we found out that actually the much publicized solidarity in the heart of the European Union was in tatters for a while. You remember when Italy asked for supplies to fight because they had the worst wave in the first stage in Europe. So that was a very, very good reminder and a lesson to us all that actually this European solidarity you should not take for granted. It's something that we constantly have to work for. It's not there as coming out of good heart. And then from there I would go to democracy, which also needs constant nurturing and to flourish. So you need to work to have healthy democracy. So there was a bit of a difference, of course, if you look at the member states that were under the Soviet boot for 45 years, coming to the Union and feeling, I'm sure for for the ex-Soviet bloc member states, it was much more a feeling, that you needed us. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had a very strong feeling that you want us to be in solidarity to you very much.
Well, in a
And
way, I must say that you are right. In the beginning, we just needed help too.
yes, just practical help, yes, but also mentally speaking, that you needed to be part of something that someone is taking you fully in and sort of like treating you right, treating you well, because you had not been treated well and right for so many decades, for a generation. So that's something about solidarity, and now I'm coming finally to present day, which is 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 um, is a very interesting thing, because you have member states in the union that are becoming, if not already are, authoritarian, and they both, Hungary and Poland, they both land into the same bloc that was there under the communist regime. And this is very, very interesting to me, because there is so much talk about how those who lived under the Soviet rule, so to say, will never forget how dear and how important democracy is for them. And once you regained, or maybe in modern sense, became democracies sort of like overnight, all of a sudden there were free elections that are, that's what that's like the heart of democracy. And I was covering, the first free elections in Bulgaria or in Poland when Lech Wałęsa became the president in 1990 in December, and the first parliamentary elections in Bulgaria. And I did a lot of those. So I went from one, Eastern European country to another, and I tried to understand how people are feeling when they regained their freedom and democracy. And it was really something that was seemed to be so much more important than I ever personally understood. And in Prague, with the Velvet Revolution starting, I saw it everywhere. But then later I realized that actually you really must not put all these countries in one block. They're all very different. They all have their own characteristics, and they all have their own history. And so now we are in a situation where a part of those countries seem to be forgetting how dear, you know, truly free elections and democracy is. That you do not start to tell people what they can read. You don't start to burn books or tear books apart on television like they're now doing in Hungary. So we are living truly historical days, I think. What happened 30 years ago has not ended. We are still living this process, and it's an ongoing process, and we don't know actually at the moment where it will lead some of these now European Union member states. So yeah, it's interesting. For me, the Baltic states were always very different from the others. Maybe, I don't know, maybe because the size, the pure size, the size of the population, also the cultural, historical roots, Hansa, all that, Um, so so there are many factors that are playing into this. But to me, it looks like democracy is very, very strongly rooted in the Baltic states, as a matter of fact, more strongly than it is in some of the bigger neighbors.
Thank you for pointing out this question about the health of the democracies in particular countries. How do you think, what really happened in the political minds of those good people who went 30 plus years ago and crashed with their bare hands the wall, or stood against the communists in Gdansk, or stood in the Baltic Way from Tallinn to Vilnius? And many of those people, which I just described, started to choose extremely extremely radical populists, and started to give the piece of power that they have to them. And the result is much more, less cohesion with Europe and much more closeness. What happened in their political views? How do you think?
This is the. I was going to say this is the $1 million question, but there's no money in the world that would be enough to pay for the answer.
Or maybe I can put it in a different way. Which factors during the last 30 years actually influenced?
No. This is the most important question you can ever ask. What happens? We go back to, I don't know, Machiavelli and about what power means and what power does to a man, but no single explanation, I'm sure, would be enough to tell us the whole story. That's something that I've been thinking a lot, because I know these people, and the rhetorics that they use is now they all of a sudden they are the victims of Brussels, or they are the victims of the big bad European Union that is trying to take away their national sovereignty and rhetoric like this. It's incredible coming out from the mouths of the same people, like you said, who were bare-fisted fighting, and on the barricades, liberating their beautiful homelands from the Soviet rule. So I don't know. The answer that I always end up with is just, I know it's too simple, but it's actually about power. How do you solidify power in your hands once you get it? And sometimes in life things actually can be interpreted and explained in very simple ways. And what I mean is when you take something that is like a big societal development or something, and then you reduce it to single persons, and then you reduce it further to how we are in our ordinary life as people. And I mean, this is not very scientific, but this is how I see it. If you ask me, I see there are just different kinds of people. At the end of the day, it's always a single individual. Sometimes it's frightening to think how actually, if you think about governments and you think about, the systems, the political systems where, for example, the president has a lot of power, like real power, the United States, France, to name the most obvious ones. And now if you add to those parliamentary democracies that are not rooted very strongly in history yet, what do you see? I mean, what you are seeing now is they're tampering with the electoral laws to make it easier for their party to never go away from power. I mean, it's so handy. You fix it a little bit here and a little bit there, and all of a sudden, boom, you have the voting districts. And this is what we are seeing, the same battle actually in the States going on. And that really makes you go silent when you think about it, that it's the same thing in just this huge scale, United States of America, that we all always thought that's like the Lady Liberty, showing us the ever shining beacon of democracy, is now in this same situation where single individuals who want to see their own power, you know, carved in stone so that they will never have to give it away. This is my answer to this. I don't have a better answer, but it's about individuals, what their moral is, what their ethics is, and I'm not going to start preaching. I'm the Parliament rapporteur for the rule of law and budget, which is the first time we are trying to really make sure that the rule of law is respected in the member states, and we try to do it through the union budget. And so I'm up my ears about people shouting and yelling to me like, who are you to discipline us, and who are you to preach us, because we were there on the barricades in Budapest or Warsaw or Prague or wherever, and so I don't want to be part of that game, but this is very clear to me. Sometimes democracy with totally free elections every 4 years is just not enough for some people.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned United States of America, and I think it's a good moment to ask about the conditions between the European Union and the states. Well, I think for many states of Europe, especially for Baltic states, America is one of the main guarantees that are possible in this world. Of course, the former president of America also brought a bit more coolness to the relationship. And there are some voices that say that European Union as a political and economic organization must be much more autonomic and less depend to American support in all fields. What do you feel about this problem?
Well, first of all, you have to go back more than back to 45, but back to the early 20th century. You have to go back to President Monroe and the Monroe Doctrine and that was the first real sort of like attempt to isolate the states from Europe, and sort of like they thought, and back to Theodore Roosevelt, but they thought that they're better off just by themselves. But that was the first wave. Then came the First World War, and then with Wilson they thought otherwise, that actually that their fate is also the fate of Europe, and of course, I mean, United States is built by Europeans, so they wanted to come over here and see that things will get right in a way, and not the wrong people will win the war. And then 20s, 30s, big recession. And then again, we were in the same mess, and again they came, and they came in big numbers, and who knows what we would have today if they had not come. So one thing that we Europeans need to admit to ourselves is that we owe so much to Washington, D.C. We owe so much that we can never pay it back. But already here, I mean, how many European politicians you hear say this? I mean, you can count them with these fingers. It was never, and then you would have to go back to of course, the big powers in Europe, France, Germany, and their history, a couple of 300 years. They never felt that Americans were always like the uneducated, uncivilized, like the generation that was not good enough for Europe left, and that's what was American when it was built. So I'm putting it in a little dramatic terms, but this is the thing. We have to admit to ourselves and understand that Europe today would not be what it is without the United States. So this is number one. Now that's from looking from here. But if we are not even ready to see that ourselves, and then you have what the trend in the States is now, and it's funny to me that actually now Europeans are paying much more attention to. There's all this talk all the time about, are Americans going to go away? They will be looking to Asia, and they're not interested in us anymore, and blah blah blah. And this is what you hear 24/7. But you don't hear, going back what I just said. We have to pay our part as well. We have to play our part, and this is what, for example, when Trump, who definitely was not my favorite U.S. president because of so many things that he made unstable, and stability is the key to successful international relations. So he made everything he could to just unravel everything. But there was something that was not understood, I think, in Europe. What he started to preach was that you have to pay your share of defense. And this, I'm again long in my words, but I'm trying to dig in deep to this transatlantic relationship that we have. That we, first of all, we would have to appreciate it in the right way, and then at the same time, if we would grow sort of like adult in that kind of way, and not always thinking that we have this kind of strange complexity about Americans, that they're sort of like almost like inferiority complexity, which is really stupid, because they were the young ones, and they, but somehow I think in old Europe, so to speak, in the heart of Europe, back in the 18th and 19th centuries, they just could not take it when they saw America starting to prosper. And then when we came to 20th century, and they rescued us twice, it's sort of like too much for Europeans to take. So, but as an answer to your question, yes, I'm really worried about the state of affairs as regards the transatlantic relationship, and I really think that we should work very hard to keep them as good friends as possible. And this is not the same thing as going and sort of like bowing to them. No, I mean, if we would grow up enough to be ready to do real integration as a union, and I'm talking about economic and putting our resources, innovation, research, development, innovation, and also defense, then we would sort of like grow up to the level that we would be equal. But I don't think we are ready for that, because I hear so much, this sort of like feeling, kind of, um, how would I explain this? If something goes wrong in American politics, as a lot has gone wrong lately, so then we are worried, yes, but we're also sort of like, well, see, that they're crazy. Those Americans are just crazy. And that's not the right way to go. We really need them. And I think we need them more, actually, than we have needed us together in a long, long time. And this is, of course, because of the great instability that Russia is reflecting, and also the problems that we have inside the union, political problems with some of the member states, and then of course because of China. But I mean, in the big picture, we really would need a strong transatlantic relationship right now, and do everything we can to make it prosper. Whether the current administration in the States sees this the same way, I think that you should not exaggerate them going away from Europe either. They, there is a very, very deeply rooted belief in Washington D.C. that Europe's fate is the fate of America as well, and it goes both ways. It's vice versa as well. So, yeah, it's very important.
How do you think? Is it possible to build more united foreign policy for the European Union? I mean, when I just overviewed some news some days ago, there was discussion about to invite Russia to the summit or not. And then there was a huge fight. It is one of the many marks that there are huge problems, systematic problems in putting together a foreign policy for the European Union. I mean, some people say that it is not necessary to have this because it's too large and too complicated confederation.
Yes, well, it's understandable that that member states are not willing to give away their full sovereignty over foreign relations. Foreign relations, of course, historically is something that is sort of like that's the last lock. It's a question of war and peace, and also trade. But so that's sort of like the last fortress that the member states want to keep for themselves. But then at the same time, over the past 10, 20 years, there's been more and more talk about the necessity of doing more qualified majority decisions over foreign policy in the European Union, and that talk has gathered force and wind behind it, especially during the last, I would say, well, after the Crimea in 2015, and then the past 5-6 years. And but we of course must not expect dramatic steps in this regard. But we are going in the right direction. But we have to make sure that this is not just some hot air that will go away. Then when maybe the imminent crisis or security threat goes away. But we would need to build this structurally towards clearly a more common European foreign policy, and that would need to have qualified majority voting in the council on those issues.
Coming back to the historical issues for a moment, it is extremely interesting to hear your perspective as a Finnish citizen. I'm talking about this debate on how to honor the memory of the victims of totalitarianism in United Europe. As we understand, half of Europe have experiences with National Socialism or with some kind of fascist regimes. So other half of Europe have experience with both or mostly with the communist regime, and mostly we see the numbers of victims of communism. For example, in Estonia, we are talking mainly about this because just of numbers and because of the periods. So it is kind of, giving birth to some controversial understandings from one side. And of course, since the real experience of the nations is so different, it is also giving, answers to why in this country there are more these monuments, and in other countries there are more different monuments, and so on and so forth. Finland is more like, standing a bit apart from this discussion because of the historical legacy. So how do you see this, fixing this memory culture, between the communist and the National Socialist crimes, and making it more as, more gathering about the idea that all those victims who died because of the political oppressions are kind of more or less equal because of their status. Nevertheless, those regimes were different.
Yeah, this brings to my mind something that when I was a young student of communications in the University of Helsinki, I will never forget, the 1928, I still remember the year, the 1928 Harold Laswell theory of how you inject information into people, that it's like this very straight line. It's like a vector that you give them a dose of information, and then they have it. Now we of course know much better, almost 100 years later, that this is not how people function. And I'm telling this because what you ask, we can and we have to do everything we can in concrete terms, such as bringing out the information and also have it in a very systematic and structured way, so that states in the European Union are really putting the resources. And this is what's happening, partly through European Union, some funds. We have this, but to tell the new generations over and over and over again. But at the same time, I have to say that I'm a little pessimistic about this.
Why?
Because simply because Laswell was not right. You cannot inject this into people, and they will not understand what it means. Just take the example what you brought up, Finland. Why is Finland so different in this respect? Although we are, you can swim from Helsinki to Tallinn if you are a very good swimmer. So, so we are not that far apart. But historically, what happened to our nations, I think the answer is there, and we know what happened. Like you said, we had a different path, but that at the same time means that path can never be sort of like in retrospective be corrected, so that the people would really, 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 in their hearts and minds understand what it means. We 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 um, uh, we kept our sovereignty, we kept our independence, and the Soviets didn't build our um, structure of our society, and tell us what to teach in schools, etc., etc., etc. The list goes on and on endlessly. So this is what we are talking about. So there was a decisive this in the history of how we what we experienced, and as regards the former Soviet bloc countries and Finland. So, but having said this, of course, you can never do enough of education and information and teaching the new generation about what it really meant for these countries and these people who got caught up on the wrong side of the history, so to speak.
Since we are slowly heading towards the end of our extremely interesting conversation, I would like, if I may, to ask a couple of a bit more personal questions too.
Sure.
The first would be quite simple and at the same time quite complicated. If you remember your, this image of what future must come after freedom will prevail, did those hopes come true in real life in the end?
Well, I would say that in many ways they did. I can of course only talk about my sort of like personal impression when I look at Europe now, and I think how people felt back then. I think that in most ways they did, but the thing again is, how does a man respect and appreciate what they have. And this goes back to what I talked earlier about going to very, very individual level and moral and ethics and all those things. I think this is the real answer. But how do you do it? I mean, how do you make people appreciate when you have new generations coming who don't even know what their parents and grandparents had to sacrifice and what they had to live through, and all their dreams were crushed. Only if you were sort of like this, part of the party and party elite, and you went that way. So then you gained some personal, maybe even prosperity, or you gained some personal perks. But for most people, it was pretty grim. And if we have half of the people nowadays who don't even have never experienced that, so in a way, I would say that I'm happy that a lot of beautiful things happened for Europe and for Eastern Europe. But at the same time, I'm a little sad that all this is sort of like fading away, and then something. Well, that's what happens in history and throughout history. But then something new comes in its place, and like I said earlier, I see rather different paths for some member states that were part of the Soviet bloc. And now in 2021, some of them are clearly in jeopardy. They are in clear and present danger of losing their democracy. Their regained democracy that they had to, people had to suffer and sacrifice so much. And then, although it happened peacefully, there was no blood, almost no blood. Unfortunately, there was some, but still, there was not a war raging throughout Europe, and it just the system crumbled down because it was, and it always will be, by the way, for those people who think that they would and their countries would be better off if they would just have this authoritarian rule. Let me tell you, it will never succeed. It's like a bad dream.
Mr. Sarvamaa, do you believe that those kids who are at the moment in the kindergartens will have happier, wealthier, healthier life than you do?
I do. Partly because I have to believe in that, and that's what keeps you working, and trying to make things better. But yes, I do. But it will be so different that like always in history, we don't know exactly what it will be like. But I believe that it will be better in most ways. Yes, because mostly probably because of technology and innovations, health-wise, and also, I think that there is a good amount of sort of like moral advancement going on when we look at the younger people, of how they, for example, think about environment and the responsibility that you have as an individual. So I see a lot of things going in good direction.
Thank you for this fantastically deep and empathic conversation. Thank you very much, Mr. Sarvamaa.
Thank you very much, Sergei.